Joining me on the podcast today is Mike Gorman, AKA Gormy. He's a self-described lifelong food addict who once weighed 550 pounds before he went through his own incredible weight loss journey. Today, he coaches with the Keto Road, and he's the host of the Fat Guy Forum podcast with over 300 episodes and counting. In this conversation, we get into the fallacy of being fixed after losing weight, why maintenance can feel boring and how to make it meaningful, using diets like keto as tools and not as a religion, the origin story and mission behind the Fat Guy Forum podcast, and much, much more. His show was hugely meaningful to me on my journey, and it was an honor to get to connect with him. If you'd like to support the show, you can share this episode with a friend or on social media, and leave a positive review wherever you're watching or listening. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Gormy, welcome to Keeping It Off.
Hey man, how's it going? I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely, yes. I'm excited to have you. I'm thankful that we get to talk today. I was recently a guest on your podcast, and we'll definitely get into some more of that history. But just for people who maybe are not longtime listeners of the Fat Guy Forum and haven't been exposed to your story, why don't we just start off with a bit of like your weight loss and kind of health journey?
Well, I self-described lifelong food addict and fat guy. Went on my first diet at 10 years old, family imposed, and have a long sordid history with weight loss. Many 100+ pound lost attempts and many multiples of 100 regains after. Heaviest weight I ever saw in my life was 550 pounds. In the early 2010s, I lost 300 pounds following a paleo diet and thought, you think you're invincible. You think that everything is perfect, and thought I had broken the patterns that I had followed for decades of my life. I'm in my 50s, so give people some context. And I put all that weight back on rapidly. And when I say rapidly, I mean 6 months. It was May of 2013 that I hit my lowest weight then. And by October, I had put all the weight back on. And that's sometimes people hear that and don't believe it, but I have the pictures. I have the scars literally to prove it. And kind of hit a point after that happened where I don't necessarily say I fell into despair and depression. It was more I came into a place of acceptance. Like, I'm not going to be able to make this change. It isn't possible for me. I'm never going to be able to do this. Might as well just embrace the life I'm living and live it for as long as I can. And very much had that philosophy that it was a live it for as long as you can. And if you burn out early, you burn out early. I, at one point during that time, used to keep a letter by my bed for my family in case I didn't wake up, because I knew I was headed in that direction. I knew when you can barely stand for 5 minutes, when walking just out to your car is a workout, you're not in great shape. And had basically decided that was going to be the life I lived. And then in the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, had some family situations happen where my parents basically were coming to me and saying, we're entering this new situation. They were adopting children or taking guardianship of babies and saying, we need you to help us. Like, we're going to need you to support us doing this. And by no means was it a you're too fat to help us discussion or anything along those lines. It was more, especially from my dad, him expressing what he was going through. And for me, that awoke something. It awoke me saying inside of my head, I'm not going to be here to help them. They're talking about how long will they be around for these children. And I'm already like, well, I'm going to peace out long before that if I don't do something. And for the first time in my life, decided that I needed to fight to live and that I wanted to live. And I had honestly never really felt that before. I was okay with headed on this very dark path and just letting that be my life. And I knew I couldn't just do what I had done before. I knew I couldn't just follow the same patterns. And in doing that, I realized that the missing piece was I was always focused on the number on the scale and what was on my plate and nothing else. I had never really considered something that I don't think people think about is when you were as large as I was and you make a significant change, your life changes in a lot of ways that you may not be ready for. And a lot of the things that I was using food for to avoid throughout my life, I was going to have to start facing. So I approached my journey from a different perspective. And that was early 2017. It actually was Valentine's Day, 2017. I romanticized that a little bit. Like, The day I started actually loving myself was Valentine's Day. There's some nice irony there. And the road wasn't simple. It was not smooth sailing. It's never, anyone who says that any kind of weight loss journey is smooth sailing is blowing smoke up your butt, probably trying to sell you something. I had points where I fell off. I was hospitalized during that initial year. I was in the hospital for 30 days dealing with pneumonia. And that honestly is probably one of the defining moments of my life, which of course it is, when you literally are told you would have died if you waited an hour before you went to the emergency room. But it was during that time that I realized that I wasn't just going through the motions. I was fighting to save my life. And I was willing to face fears I had had for decades. I hadn't seen a doctor in over 25 years before I went in the hospital that time.
Wow.
And I came out of that with a new perspective on my life, and things kind of move forward from there. Lost over 250 pounds. I've kept that weight off. I've had fluctuations. I think every person who goes on a weight loss journey does. 2 years ago, lost my mother. That was a significant impact. It was sudden and out of nowhere. But I think I hit a point where I knew that I needed to get some things back in line with my health, and I just didn't care more, from a place of grief. And coming out of that was another transformative experience, like realizing that the world doesn't end just because some things end. And, I think we all as people experienced that during the pandemic, when we all thought the world was ending and realized that it wasn't and had to resume life. So I say that for me, it's been a long time learning a lot of lessons that I finally put together during all of this time. It's a post-pandemic, it was 2020. I actually started working with other people, coaching people. And I tend to focus on working with people that not just have to get their nutrition in line and not have to build an exercise habit, but really need to work on mindset, need to work on their relationship with food, because I feel like that's where a lot of insight for me came on my journey. And so, I know we said a short introduction, so I won't keep I won't keep blathering, but I'll say it's been. I feel like I've lived so many of the cliches. Like you have to fight, you have to want to fight to live. These journeys are not straight lines, and what I've come to realize through all of it is that all of that's okay. Like, it's okay that some days it feels like a battle, and it's okay that some days are smooth sailing. It's okay that some days that scale behaves and some days it doesn't. And you have to have a strong driving purpose. Like, I talk constantly in every forum that I'm in, whether it's an actual titled forum podcast or on my social media or just talking with clients or people in general. You have to understand why making change is important for you. And that's something that I was always missing. And I think once that really clicked for me, it changed a lot of things inside my head, inside my life, like understanding that regardless of the day you're having or the week you're having or the month you're having or the year you're having, your purpose for change still matters if it's important and emotionally resonant for you. And helping other people find that has been one of the greatest joys in my life, like finding that purpose, finding that fire to fight. And that's also kind of where the podcast evolved out of.
Yeah, we'll dig into all that. I do want to revisit kind of something you said about the period where you rapidly regained weight, because that resonated with me because I went through something similar, not quite as the same amount of weight, but I had a period where I had lost, over 100 pounds. And one thing that shocked me from that period was I think I assumed that if I can lose 100 pounds, surely I would have figured everything out. Like if whatever it took to lose weight for, for however long it took me to lose 100 pounds, I think it ended up being over a year that it took me to, to lose that weight. I must have developed some habits, patterns, behaviors that should have fixed me, right? I should be fixed. And it was so shocking because I regained my weight during COVID. It was shocking to me that I wasn't fixed. I wasn't, just like I still had the same struggles. I still had the same issues. And even there were periods that seemed harder after I lost the weight than before. What was that experience like for you? And what was the surprise? What were surprising about, when you initially lost that weight and then went through that period of regain?
Well, you said something in there that I think isn't that one of the biggest fallacies in weight loss is that you hit a goal and you're fixed, or that we're ever really fixed. And I'll go back into what the weight gain was like, but I'll say the biggest lesson that I learned in all of it is that we're never really fixed. It's that we get stronger and we learn how to manage the challenges better. They don't necessarily ever completely go away. They can
Mm.
disappear. They can be quieter at times. Times can be easier, but it's you get better at managing them and realizing when they're happening until you're at a point where it's too overwhelming to feel like you can do anything about it. For me, what several things I think contributed to what I went through, and one of the big ones was I was so focused on losing a certain amount of weight, like getting to a certain number on the scale, that I started going from following the healthy way of eating that I was following to really incorporating things that were not healthy, unhealthy behaviors, just for the sake of chasing losing weight. And that was it's funny now because it's tactics that people talk about and use, but I think for most people it can be unhealthy, and that's alternate day fasting. I was alternate day fasting and was probably eating around 1,000 calories on the day that I was eating. If you're
Mm.
properly alternate day fasting, you're still eating enough food for every day of the week. You're just controlling things. Like that's a whole nother discussion. But I was starving myself,
Mm.
and I hit a little. It literally was. I went away on a vacation for my 40th birthday, managed that vacation impeccably with food choices. Went to Disneyland for 4 days, ate paleo, ate on plan the whole time. Was in California visiting. Everything was fantastic, and it was on the trip home that I just got overwhelmed with the whole. You've done so well. You've done so much work these past 3 years. You deserve a break, and that was the snowball. And it literally snowballed from deciding to have one meal at an airport to a cheat day the next day to a weekend to a week, and then I was off the rails. My food addiction was back, full blown. And like you said, that was when I realized that it wasn't just that I needed to change the foods that I was eating and how much was going onto my plate. There was a whole lot more work to do. There was a whole lot more about my relationship with food that had nothing to do with the types of food that I was eating. Are there ways of eating that I feel better and thrive on? Yes, I'm keto. I haven't really said that yet, but in 2017, I started following a ketogenic lifestyle. I've been keto for 8.5 years. It is sustainable for me. I thrive on it. Not for everyone, but for me, it works. But it was what was I using food for? And I wasn't paying attention to that. So that happened. And I'm sure you can relate to this because I know we've talked through what you went through during the pandemic, but I put the weight on so fast that it felt like a train that I couldn't stop.
Mm.
It literally, I put 100 pounds on in a month, that first month. And by the time that happened, any thoughts of you got to course correct, you have to do something, were drowned in the thoughts of you've thrown everything away. Look at all the hard work you did. You were supposed to be fixed. It didn't work. Nothing's going to work. Like that negative self-talk, which I also think is, and I've come to learn over the years, is excuses, is really just the bull crap that we tell ourselves and we believe that we can never come back from something, that change is impossible, all of that stuff, because it makes us feel better and it enables the behavior. And my behavior was really addict behavior. And so facing that reality was probably one of the hardest things I had to go through to lose weight again, to understand that it couldn't just be, here's the portion I have to eat, here's what needs to be on my plate, any of that. It needed to be, why am I eating this food? Why am I eating the way that I'm eating? Why does this matter to me every day? I use the word why a lot, so I apologize for that. But when I determined what my why was in 2017, I took a pad of post-it notes and wrote it down and hung it up all over my apartment. And I hung it up on my desk at work. And I had it inside of my car. And at that point, it was the phrase, I want to live. And I just had that everywhere because I needed to remind myself every day that was why I was getting up early. The whole concept of your podcast is keeping it off. We don't talk in the health and fitness space enough about how maintenance is as challenging or more challenging than losing weight. Most people that struggle with maintaining weight loss don't need help losing weight. They need help
Mm-hmm.
figuring out how to maintain that weight loss. And most books written about weight loss have a really small chapter at the end that is basically like, keep doing what you're doing, but eat a little bit more food. Your body can eat a little more food now because you're not worried about losing weight. And it's so much more complex than that. And it's so much more of a challenge, but we beat ourselves up because we hit that finish line. Like we achieved the goal. And another big thing that I learned is that, especially for people that need to lose a significant amount of weight, goals need to never go away. You need to have goals that you're working on, because working on goals is what helped you get to the point that you wanted to be at. and having goals that continue to move you forward and motivate you and give you purpose and inspiration are the things that carry you forward.
Something that you said, about the idea for this podcast and kind of the heart of it, keeping it off. You're totally right in that so much is focused on that initial weight loss, right? And so we get that weight off, and some of us, like, I think many people, at least for me, I think it's the case for you as well, many of us are like become experts at losing weight, where we've done it so many times and we get so good at it, and we know exactly kind of what little changes we need to make to lose the weight. And then, but like, we're always in this constant state of one extreme of losing weight, or we flip the switch to the other side and we're just like, well, screw it, I'm just gonna eat whatever and kind of indulge and go back to, like you said, like before we did this behavior shift. So what was, I know you've already talked about it a good bit, but like kind of just frame it in that way of what was it for you that kind of made you realize this is not going to be like just another short-term period of my life. This literally has to become the next transformation. This has to be a whole life transformation, or this has to be the next, like period of my life, like moving forward.
Well, I think something, and I think a lot of people fall into this trap and don't realize it, is losing weight is exciting. And for some of us, staying big or getting bigger is exciting as well, because we're eating all the foods that we love and we're not putting any restrictions on ourselves. Maintenance is boring. Keeping weight off is boring. And I don't mean that in a negative way, or to be like, oh, it's crap. I mean, you're not chasing a number on the scale anymore. And seeing the same number on the scale, and I think honestly, most of us, when we head into a maintenance phase, and I know I did this, seeing the same number on the scale was exciting for a few weeks. Then you realize it's a normal part of your life and you're actually having to live your life. And so I think for me, what I had to find was something else that was exciting, something else in my life that would excite me and give me satisfaction, because I was always looking for satisfaction in food and never found it, and never looked to other areas of my life, never looked, whether that becomes for some people career, whether it becomes focused on family, whether it becomes focused on helping other people. It's finding that way to capture some of that similar energy, so that that energy that carried you through weight loss continues, but you realize that it transforms. And I had to be okay with maintenance being boring. I had to be okay with, now that I've built an exercise habit, there's no excitement at the consistency of following through on it. Because when I was building it, that was incredibly exciting. Being able to do more in the gym, being able to walk further, being able to walk faster. Never got into running, and a lot of people do, and I'll never understand that psychology. But it wasn't, wow, I went from 2 days a week to 3 days a week to 5 days a week, or whatever it looked like. That's exciting when you're losing weight. Clothes sizes changing is incredibly exciting. At my biggest, I was wearing an 8XL shirt. Like, being able to actually walk into a store and buy clothes the first time is incredibly exciting. And then once it becomes normal, it's not as exciting. And so I think sometimes a big challenge that I know I faced, had to do with boredom and not doing anything to fill that space, not doing anything to actually understand what I was thinking, what I was feeling, and not staying in touch with it. And that's like, I had a conversation with a client a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, I've come to the realization that even if my approach to food changes for the rest of my life, I'm still going to have to be mindful about food. I'm still going to have to pay attention to the things that I do. And I'm like, yeah, that's the medicine that we need to be able to live that healthy life going forward. I still have to have goals, and I still have to have things that I feel like I'm working towards. And those goals don't have to involve the scale. Like, it's not saying have a goal involving the scale for the rest of your life. It's saying, understand, you need to feel a sense of purpose, or it's very easy for old habits to slide back into place. Very easy, especially when those old habits were related to not having purpose.
So I want to dig in a little bit. You've already mentioned keto.
Mm-hmm.
I know that on this podcast we're open to lots of different methods of losing weight. So I've had people that have had bariatric surgery, people who have just done kind of diet and exercise. I'm looking forward to talking to someone who has primarily lost weight through like GLP-1s and
Mm-hmm.
medications and stuff like that. There's lots of tools we have nowadays.
Yeah.
But keeping in mind that some of the stuff you've already talked about mindset, about a relationship with food, about emotional behavior patterns, all of those things are maybe primary and subservient to the method. Talk a little bit about your relationship with keto. You said that was your
Mm-hmm.
primary method for losing weight. So what was it about that particular tool that was useful for you? And then have you ever considered other tools? What other things have you looked into or thought about?
So, like I said, I've been on many diets throughout my life. I've done Weight Watchers several times. I'm old enough to have very much been a fan of and used Richard Simmons' Deal a Meal, where you used to deal different cards out of a deck to yourself every day, and Sweat to the Oldies. I'm not ashamed to say I was dancing to Sweat in the Oldies videos in my college dorm room, and got discovered once doing that. That was fun. Um, and then other things throughout the years, and at one point in the late 90s, late 90s, I discovered a book called The Carb Addict's Diet, and the carb addiction plan is what it was called. And it was written by these two doctors who had used it themselves, and they basically ate low carb meals twice a day, and then they had what they called their reward meal. The concept now is mind boggling in a lot of ways when I look back on it, but basically you had an hour to eat whatever you wanted. So you could have two smaller meals and then eat whatever you wanted in an hour. I lost like 50 pounds initially doing this. And then it stopped not really working because I was out, you become like an Olympic hero during that hour. And they adjusted their plan to be like, well, it's not just an hour. You have to eat a salad first and then you have to balance everything, and it became like the way most plans become. But I learned during that time that clearing out a lot of foods from my life gave me some freedom from the physical side of my food addiction issues. And going paleo also helped me a lot with that. For people who may not be, paleo is not as big as it used to be, but paleo is basically getting rid of all grains, added sugars. You're basically eating proteins, animal fats, vegetables and fruits. And eventually, it's funny, when I started paleo, honey was a no-no, and then honey started to be allowed. And as happens with a lot of areas of weight loss, when the people following the plan don't want to give up things, the people who put it out start to make adjustments. But that's a whole nother, again, another discussion. So I knew pulling back on heavy starches and carbohydrates and junk foods and things along those lines was something that I responded to. So I had, in 2016, even during that time of not really thinking about weight loss, I actually ordered some books because keto was a brand new word I saw. And I was like, oh, you have one of those weekends of momentum where you're like, I'm going to change. So I placed my Amazon Prime order. I got the books. I never read them, but because by the time they had arrived, I decided I wasn't trying again. It was in early 2017 that I decided to actually read these books, and it made sense to me. It clicked. And I was like, well, let me give this a try. And not many people are talking about it, but this may be something that I respond to. And back in 2017, when you went to a restaurant and asked for a burger with no bun, you got looked at like you were an alien. Now on the Wendy's app, you can say no bun, if you're doing a pickup order. That it's changed a lot. But I started doing it and I realized that eating a ketogenic diet gave me physical relief from cravings from food. So the overwhelming physical drive for food was reduced by the fact that, and I'm not one of those people that says, ketosis is magic and managing your blood sugar is magic. And by you're just cutting out carbs, I am fully aware of the fact that most of those very carb dense foods I was eating were also very heavy in fat. So highly calorically dense with not a lot of nutrition value. But by focusing on eating proteins and healthy fats and lower carb vegetables and some lower carb fruits, I found physical relief I hadn't found before when it came to food cravings. What then that opened up for me was realizing that there was a whole mental side to the weight loss process for me. But I identify keto as being the tool for me that gave me the bandwidth to handle the mental side, so
Mm.
that intense physical desire for food and not understanding the hunger signals in my body, that was ameliorated by following a ketogenic diet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was undiagnosed diabetic. I had that confirmed in the hospital, and a lot of things along those lines. But then by following a ketogenic diet, you get blood sugar stabilization, and you're not dealing with the things, that the side effects that can come from there. And for me, it was relief, and I love the food. Like, I really enjoyed the food that I was eating and creating and cooking, and navigating menus and things along those lines. And I found it to be something that worked for me and
Yeah.
allowed me to thrive from a physical place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked what you said about basically by adopting ketogenic mindset, it just took a bunch of foods kind of off the table for you so
Mm-hmm.
that it was less of that mental load
Mm-hmm.
of I need to try to balance, however many, all these different cuisines and foods and different things. It's just sort of like simplified life a little bit and said, well,
Mm-hmm.
these things are kind of off the table, these things are on, and I can kind of like manage
Mm-hmm.
my relationship with these foods rather than manage my relationship with all food.
Well, and because for me, it is an addictive relationship with food. I don't believe that food addiction and alcohol addiction and drug addiction are the same thing, but they function on similar pathways for people. And you would never say to someone that has an alcohol problem, "Well, can't you just have a little bit? Can't you just do this?" And I think people do that with people with food all the time. The whole, it's a party. Can't you just have a piece of cake? You're here. Can't you just have that? And the way I respond to that is saying, this is the way of eating that saved my life. I was going to die. If you enjoy having me around, I don't really need you trying to push other food on me. I don't need you trying to tell me that I'm missing out on something, because I know that I'm not. And I get the question, and I say this a lot on podcasts. People say, "Yeah, but you're never going to have cake again." Is that what you're saying? If you're keto, you can't have cake. And my response is never, "Well, no, I'm never going to have a piece of cake again for the rest of my life." It's that I learned the lesson that if I were never to have a piece of cake again for the rest of my life, I could be happy and I could thrive. So when I make
Mm,
the decision to have a piece of cake, it's a conscious decision now. It's not just, "Oh, there's cake here, I have to eat it." It's not, "My
mhm,
pantry is stocked, I have to dive into that pantry." It's, I can make choices, and I can feel a sense of control around food that I never really had. And I've tried the portion controlling diets. I've tried the eat everything. I've tried that promise that people make of, you'll see dietitians say this a lot, especially when they deal with people with food issues. Exposure is what helps you manage foods. You know, Keep all the foods that you feel you can't control in your house and have them whenever you want them. And eventually you won't want them as much. And I can say, after trying that for 40 years, it didn't work. And for
right.
most people, it does not work. And it infuriates me when I see people that have never really struggled with their weight saying, "Well, I have one Reese's peanut butter cup after I have my dinner and I'm completely satisfied." And I'm like, "Well, that's great for you. I am happy that you don't understand the fire that lights inside of me."
Mhm,
I wrote a blog once that I called Lighting the Fuse. And it's about how making that choice to have that food, it's almost like then it lights the wick on a bomb. And then I have to immediately go into damage control mode and try to douse that wick before the bomb explodes. And if someone can't understand that, I'm happy for them. But I know for me that sometimes it means I have to say no to things that I want. And that's okay. That's a part of being an adult. Like, there's this negative connotation to the word restriction in the health and fitness space. You'll see people make promises, "I'm going to help you lose weight without ever restricting your food." And it's like, well, when you get into it, you actually are promoting restriction. It's just your form of restriction. And you don't like my form of restriction. You like your form of restriction. I don't think restriction is a dirty word. We restrict
mhm.
things with purpose. We restrict things with reason. And if that means, it was my sister's birthday a week or two ago, and we went out to dinner at this incredibly fancy restaurant that I would never be able to afford on my own. And I had dessert at that restaurant, but I didn't bring that dessert back to my house. I didn't keep it in the fridge. And then I had to face 3 days of obsessing over when was I going to eat it and when was I going to have, like, I didn't have to reenact that pattern. I can make the decision. And that's one of the things that these years of work have taught me is like, I can be conscious in my choices around food. And I don't have to let anyone else dictate to me whether or not they like the choices that I make. I know that they promote my health. I know that I'm healthier than I've ever been in my life and that I'm alive and thriving. So if it works for me, great. I mean, I'll be honest, I went through that early 2017, 2018, 2019. I was a keto zealot. You know, I would say on Instagram, every person on the planet should be eating a ketogenic diet, but not everyone can manage it, and that's okay. I don't think every person on the planet should be eating any one specific diet. I don't think every person who needs to lose weight should use one specific tool. But I do think you need to do the work to find the tool that's going to be right for you and be open to the fact that it may not be what you anticipated when you start that journey of discovery.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that, and I really appreciate you. I think we have a bias as, just humans, that whatever works for us, we just automatically assume that this is what clicked for me. So, and I don't think it's nefarious most of the time. It's just like we want to share that we're so proud of our success and we're happy we had success, and so we want to share that
Hmm.
with others.
Oh,
We
yeah.
want people to experience the same benefits, and so we
Hmm.
really push a particular thing. But I think one thing that I'm trying to promote through this podcast is the idea that it isn't one particular tool. It's not
Hmm.
one particular method. There's people who have been successful, like I said, medications, certain,
Hmm.
diets, keto, paleo, Weight Watchers, Noom, all these different diets.
Hmm.
And there are people, I think there's other common factors, because there's people who go on keto and have a really rough time on it, and
Yeah.
maybe they lose weight but they just gain it quickly afterwards. They can't sustain it. And then there's obviously people who get on it, they stay, they're successful, it's a really good fit for them. So there's got to be some other common factors
Hmm.
between people who are successful and people who are not successful. That's not the tool, right? It's not,
Hmm.
our culture, especially because we're monetarily incentivized a lot of times
Hmm.
to push a particular tool. And hey, we happen to be selling that tool, so here you go. This is the tool
Hmm.
that's going to solve everyone's problems. But rather than pushing that particular tool, that's my interest, is really just digging into the habits, patterns, behaviors,
Hmm.
mindsets that are common throughout any person that has been successful. And so, and to kind of transition, the way that I initially came across you was your podcast. You started this
Hmm.
podcast many years ago now, called the Fat Guy Forum. And when I was kind of at my point of regain right in the middle of COVID, I kind of came across your podcast. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about why you initially started the Fat Guy Forum podcast, and a little bit of that process from starting it until where it's grown to now.
Definitely. So I'm an all or nothing kind of person when I get into doing something. And so with weight loss, what that often involved was reading a ton of books, YouTube channels, social media channels, and I discovered in like 2018 podcasts. And one of the things I discovered very quickly was that the majority of health and fitness podcasts out there were targeting two groups. They were targeting women, mostly. I won't say for the nefarious reasons, but women are the biggest consumers when it comes to products, when it comes to weight loss and things along those lines. So obviously there's a little bit of monetization going on there, but also I think women were more open in a lot of ways when it comes to talking about these kind of struggles. And or the other form of the podcast was men that were really into fitness and were already athletes, and when they talk about their weight loss stories, they're talking about, I went from being an elite level college athlete to working a desk job, and I put on 40 pounds and I had to get back to my roots and lose the weight. And I never heard stories of people like me. I could not
Mm,
find stories of, not saying I'm the average Joe, but, of men that were talking about openly about the struggles, because a lot of the times the podcasts that I listen to that were focused on men were just focusing very much on lifting weights and physical activity in the gym and what supplements they were taking, not to put anyone down. But there were no voices in the space sharing the stories of men. And I had been interacting with so many people on various social media platforms and hearing stories and being inspired by them and building connections and wanted there to be a space to share their stories. And it wasn't me saying, oh, women, you're locked outside the door. When I created the concept for the show, it was at that time, I could probably have listed a dozen podcasts that were doing a similar thing for women, and there wasn't one for men, not one.
Mm-hmm.
And there were shows that would intermittently have a male guest telling their story, but for the most part, they were focusing on women's stories. So I got it in my head that I wanted to create that space. The evolution of that is kind of funny because I had the idea in 2018, and it was summer of 2019 that I had come up with the name. I had someone on Fiverr design a logo for me. I bought the domain, and I paid for recording software. And then I spent a year recording the first episode and deleting it. And I recorded and deleted it upwards of a half dozen times. I hated my voice. I felt like I wasn't saying the things I wanted to say. And I really got stuck inside my head. And I had all these friends that knew I was planning it and working on it. And I was talking to them about it. And finally, I went to an event called KetoCon, which now is called Hack Your Health, but KetoCon in 2019. And I got cornered by 4 friends. And they were like, you have a month when you get back from this event to get an episode out. You have a month. And I never really was sure what would happen if I didn't, but the threat felt real, like, because it literally was cornered in the middle of this auditorium floor where this convention was happening. I was like, okay. And they're like, record it and put it out and just make it happen. And some of those people became actually some of the early guests on the show because they're like, we'll come on. So I went home that summer, and I think it was probably a week later that I dropped the first episode. It was like July 2nd of 2020, which probably, honestly, when you look at it now, was not a great time to launch a podcast heading into a holiday weekend, but I did it anyway. And it just grew from there. The intent and purpose of the show is to share all men's stories of dealing with weight issues at all stages of their journeys. I've had literally any way of losing weight you can think of. I've had guests on the show. I've had, at this point, over 300 guests on the show.
Mm-hmm.
So every surgery that has existed or will ever, exist up to this point, medications, keto, all the different forms of keto, carnivores, dirty keto, Weight Watchers. I've had a lot of people that use Weight Watchers. I've had people that used Optavia, Jenny Craig, like everything. And it's never about this tool is like the best tool for everyone. It's about how do we manage differences and how do we manage, their own journeys and tell their story. Like, it really is a telling story podcast. I don't ever go in with the intentions of these are the exact things I want to get from every guest. I want that person to tell their story in their words and see what they learn from doing it. It's a podcast that a lot of people come on first before they go on another show or start their own podcast. I would say at this point, I've probably had at least a half a dozen people start shows after they've come on the show, if not more than that. I've had guys come on that were living maintenance for a decade. I've had guys come on that had just hit their weight loss goal. I've had guys come on that are in the middle. I've had a couple guests that hadn't even started losing weight yet. And, I very specifically remember I had one guest who wasn't sure if he was going to. And it was very much a cathartic discussion because he was deep in that place of, I know I need to, but I don't know if I can or if I should and what I should do. And that one resonated with a lot of people in ways that I never expected it would. But it's about understanding that our journeys have commonalities, even if there are some real base differences that people would normally think would divide us. I've had men, of all ages as well. I've had, people well past retirement, and I've had college students. I've had people starting families or people that want to start families, like all different phases and all different stories. And like you've talked about and spoken to, there's something in every story that any person listening can learn from and resonate with. Whether it's learning that you definitely don't want to do what that person did, or you may want to try what that person, like it doesn't have to be that commonality of shared experience. It can just be, this provokes me to think more about this topic for myself and allows me to hear. And I think the greatest thing is just allowing people to hear that other people struggle. So, you're not alone if you're listening. You're not the only person who goes through the thoughts that you're having and the ups and downs and the cycles that you go through and all of those things. And we're 300 and almost 330 episodes since 2020. I just I really enjoy doing it. It's just become this ever evolving, but still sticking to the core mission of what it's about. I get asked a lot, why won't you have women come on the show? Or would you ever think about, the question I get that I like is, would you ever think about starting a podcast that tells women's stories? And I think that is a fantastic idea. And my response to that, though, is I'm not so sure that a man should be the person curating the stories of women on the internet. Like, there's something about power dynamics and that come into play with that idea of, will it sound more like a mansplaining podcast than it would about one that actually has that mission? I could have guests of all genders and it would be completely fine. I did consider starting a spinoff where I was going to interview the spouses of the men that were on the show.
Right.
Logistically, that ran into some things that probably aren't appropriate to share on the internet with what happened with some of those spouses. So that didn't happen, but you never know what might happen.
Right.
Because I think that would be really interesting to talk to the partner of someone who watched the person that I already talked to struggle and supporting them to that or not supporting them to that, like what that experience was like for them. Because I think that's another area where the stories aren't really talked about.
Yeah, I agree. That's a free tip for anyone listening out there that wants to start a podcast. That because there's so many aspects to this that you can really dive into. I know relationships is a huge topic over. When we talk about losing weight, keeping it off, having these massive changes, going from someone who's morbidly obese to someone who's living the kind of life that maintains a healthy weight, that's life transformation. That's literally changing your life, and that involves so many facets of your life, and a huge one is going to be the relationships, the most the people that are closest to you. And I know just looking at statistically, people who have bariatric surgery, there's a huge separation statistic, and I'm sure it's similar with other people who go through these big changes, whether they do it with diet and exercise or GLP-1s, because you're changing a ton of the elements about your life. And the people closest to you, that really impacts them. I know for me personally, my wife and I both had bariatric surgery within 2 weeks of each other. So we really decided this was a journey we were going to go on together. And she hasn't been on the podcast or the YouTube channel yet, but it definitely is coming. She's working up her courage and her experience. But that's a huge underserved part of this space, I would say.
Yeah. Well, you think about how many times, and I know I get this at times online, and I'm sure you have in conversations with people when someone says, I want my family member to have the same success that you're having. How do I talk to them about doing it? And it's such murky water. The answer at the end of the day becomes, if that's not a discussion that they're starting with you, all you can really do is either choose to put it out there and understand that they may react however they're going to react, or just keep yourself open to conversations like that. And if you hear them saying something that sounds like they want to talk about it, not letting that time go past.
You said something a little bit earlier when you were talking about kind of the goal of your podcast, or one of the things you were hoping that people got out of it was that just that feeling that they weren't alone, that there was someone else that was going through something similar. Just something I wanted to mention because, it came up for me is like, that was literally my experience with your podcast. Cause I was in the middle of, it wasn't full lockdown, but it was somewhere later 2020 or 2021 when I came across it. And after having regained the weight and kind of going to that place where I was just like, resigned to the fact that I'm just going to accept that I'm going to be overweight and I'm going to have a shortened lifespan, and kind of what you were saying earlier, that, it's just this resignation of like, well, I guess this is my life. This is, there's not a way out of it. Hearing the stories on your podcast and hearing your story as well, that you did have that regain and you still were able to find a way out of that place, that was huge for me. And it was inspirational. So thank you for creating that. And, my hope with this podcast is that a little bit of that paying forward, where, it may never be this hugely successful, massive audience podcast, but there may be one or two people that listen to it and really are inspired, and their life changes because of, some of the inspiration and some of the lessons they learned. So that's ultimately what it's about. And I just wanted to mention that here because I appreciate, you going through the obviously your own personal journey, but also the the effort and then the time investment of making your podcast, because it's helped me, and I know it's helped a lot of other people.
Well, I greatly appreciate hearing that and love getting any feedback from anyone, who listens to the show, but hearing you say that and then knowing what you're going on to do. And I think what you're doing is another fantastic avenue, to continue spreading that inspiration and that sense of community and that sense of camaraderie and all of those different feelings that come along when you make connections. Whether you actually make a direct connection with someone or you just connect with their story and connect with what you're hearing and, hearing people talk, especially in the context of this show, like hearing people talk about the reality of keeping it off, and I'm not just saying that to help you with branding. It's that idea of understand, to continue to spread that understanding. Like, again, it comes back to, you know, you can lose weight following any diet. You can lose weight using any tool. Really, I think every human being could probably lose weight following any diet if they followed it strictly. But it's, can you sustain it? Is it actually going to fit into your life? All of those things. And then how does that translate into what you do later? And having discussions about what comes next is really important because I don't think enough people are talking about it.
Yeah. So I gotta ask this. It's been on my mind since you agreed to come on. So you've been able to talk to 300 plus guests over the years. Like you said, lots of different stories, lots of different methods, lots of different tools. What would you say are some common themes that you pull out from people who have been able to be successful, and specifically people who you've noticed have been able to sustain that a lifestyle change? It wasn't just a lose weight and then kind of a flash in the pan, but it was something that they really changed their life and were able to have success long term.
Well, I think one thing that's really important, that even if a person uses a supplemental tool like weight loss surgery or a GLP-1 or anything, is finding a way of eating that your body thrives on and learning to connect with what foods make your body feel good and what foods don't make you feel good, and listening to that. That's one of the common lessons I think that comes out really strongly is people don't just connect with their bodies to lose the weight. They stay in contact with themselves, which sounds probably silly, but it's important. Like, it's knowing that if I feel like garbage after I eat a certain food, why am I continuing to return to that food regularly? Like, and I think because one of the other things that I think became truly apparent through my work on the show is every person that I've spoken to that has lost weight, like using weight loss surgery, ended up doing everything that every person who lost weight without surgery did. And that's not to say that the surgery wasn't needed. Even though some of the guests have said that, and I'm still not 100% on board, with that sentiment from them, because I think it is a tool that sometimes people really definitely need. You still have to find yourself, come to a place where you become mindful about food, you become mindful about your body, you build regular activity into your life, you continue to look at the things that you want to do with your life, and you actually start achieving them. I think that's really important. Following through on goals is something I see as a common thread. And, I always ask, like, I always ask at the end of the show, like, what's a goal you have that's not related to health or fitness or weight loss? Because I don't think enough of us think of that. So I pepper that one in there. But I also always ask, like, what comes next? And I think sometimes people are stumped by that question. Like, well, I lost the weight. Why do I have to think about what comes next? I think the people that have been successful and have kept it off do think about what comes next. They think about where they want their life to go, but they also honor what got them to where they're at is the other thing. The flip side of that, all of the changes that we make, like you talked about in your own experience, thinking that the habits that you had built were going to be the things that just helped you keep the weight off. I think sometimes that doesn't work out. And I hear that in stories that I'm told because the person forgets what they did to get to where they were, the discipline that it took, the consistency that it took. And it is that discipline and consistency would probably be the one common thread to every story of success that I've heard, is that they found their path that was sustainable for them and they applied it consistently. And they didn't just ever say, I'm just going to go back to the way things were.
You said something towards the beginning there about like listening to your bodies. It just made me think
Hmm.
of, I think I got so numb to like what, when you said being in touch with your body, like that's a whole process that I'm going through now, that I find myself much more sensitive to things like, certain foods or
Hmm.
certain exercises, or, just I am more in touch with my body. But I think it's because I got so used to being, because my body was just constantly either in pain or, uncomfortable or all these things. Right.
Hmm.
Or it was telling me I was full and I was ignoring that
Hmm.
signal and I was pushing past it. So I got so good at pushing past all my body's like communication with me to say, hey, you've eaten enough, or hey, you
Hmm.
need to move, or hey, this food is not agreeing with you. So that's a whole process that it made me think of, that, this losing weight, because it never made sense to me when people said listen to your body. It never really clicked with me. Like,
Hmm.
my body doesn't really tell me anything. But now looking back, after losing, almost 200 pounds, my body was saying things, but I got so used to that being my normal state that I
Hmm.
just assumed there wasn't anything that I could learn. And I was just, I just ignored that for so long. So yeah, that made me think of that. One thing I also wanted to ask you, going from people who have had success, are there people on your that you've listened to over your podcast, and obviously not naming any names or anything, but
Hmm.
are there people throughout the years on your podcast that maybe have had more struggles, they've had more setbacks, they haven't been as successful? Are there any themes, or maybe you could say warning signs that
Hmm.
you could look out for and say this person may have some struggles, with this approach, or this mindset, I guess you could say?
A big red flag for me is someone who's really cocky and is convinced that everything is going to be easy, who doesn't see the challenges in keeping it off. I hear that a lot from people when I talk to them kind of at the end of their weight loss phase. And I always will ask those people, so what are the things that you've learned to that you feel are going to help you keep the weight off? Like, basic question. And it's the answer to that question that speaks volumes to me. Because if the person's answer is really vague and is like, well, I'm just going to continue pushing forward, that to me is a sign that they're not in touch with the things that they're going to need to help them along the way. I think another big thing is there are people that lose weight using different methods that don't make the changes that they need to make with their relationship with food and are leaning on the tool. I've seen it happen with several people. I'll specifically say with weight loss surgery.
Hmm.
You can still lose a significant amount of weight on weight loss surgery just eating crap food and not following the rules. But because the physical restriction allows you to do that. And those are the people that I'll talk to 6 months, a year later, that are either back where they started or struggling because they squandered that tool. And I've had guys on the show that did that and came back from it and talked about that experience. I think about someone I had on a couple months ago, and he was like, look, I screwed it up. Like, I thought I was the king of the world. I got cocky and I didn't change anything I was eating. And I just figured out what were the things that I could eat that wouldn't cause disruptions and never did any of the work. And then figured out that he had to do it. So I think the biggest warning sign that I would look at for someone who may not have success in maintenance would be the person that thinks the hard part is over.
Mm.
Is the person who thinks that things are magically different, because that's the person who then sets themselves up for a big fall when some of those challenges come back because they were convinced that they were gone. And I'm not saying live in constant fear of cravings or behaviors coming back or bad habits, but I'm saying live in a state of mindfulness so that you can catch those things before they become overwhelming.
You've experienced all of these stories, amazing stories, through your podcast. I'm curious, what would you say has changed about your journey as a
Mhm.
result of, the things that you've learned, and the stories that you've experienced, through the podcast?
Well, I think one of the biggest gifts that doing the podcast has given me is being open to that idea that we've talked about a lot already today, but that being open to using what you need when you need it, being able to accept sometimes that the path we want to follow isn't going to be the one that's going to get us to where we want to be. And so sometimes that will mean having to pay attention to things that I feel like I don't need to anymore, things along those lines, or make food choices that reflect what I need, not what I want. And that was already something I was learning on my weight loss journey, but the podcast evolution went hand in hand with that. And so I think for me, it really is just pulling the big themes that you asked about, like the idea of mindset. Like I think mindset is really important. And I don't think enough people work on it. And I think that's where failure comes from. I think it's from not building the mental resilience that you need to be able to sustain this effort that needs to go into losing weight. My podcast isn't just for people, sometimes I have guests on the show that were 600 pounds when they started and lost 400 pounds. And sometimes I have guests on the show that losing 40 pounds was what they needed to do to transform their life. And so what I've learned in that for myself also is empathy towards the challenges, because my need to lose, over 200 pounds felt the same as the need of someone else who needed to lose 30. And it can be easy. I think there are times where it could be easy to mock that, or look at that as well as, yeah, just, stop drinking regular soda and skip a bun now and then and you'll be fine. And that's not really the lived experience of the person that struggles with that 40 pounds. Like it's understanding that the commonality, even if the scale is different, literally and figuratively sometimes, help me build an empathy that not only applies to myself, so being able to give myself empathy when needed, but being able to work better with different clients and people of dealing with different challenges, and finding what I want to continue to do with my life through being inspired by hearing people who felt like their lives were over.
Yeah. So having a lot of exposure to, a lot of different people in their journeys, you have kind of this broad view of lots of people in the, weight loss space, we'll say. What would you say if there was like a misconception or a challenge that you feel like a lot of people are facing that you could address? Is there something that sticks out that's like, a common challenge that or a common misconception that people have about this journey?
There's nothing magical and special about losing weight. It's not something unique or innate that I was born with or you were born with, that people that have incredible success stories that you see online are born with. Every person who puts in the work can do it. But I think too many people get stuck in the misconception. Like if I was only as motivated as that person, I would do it. If I only had access to this, I would do it. It doesn't take money. It doesn't take innate skills. We all have gone through things in our past that impact the life skills we learned along the way. You can still learn those things now. Like it's possible to make change. Change is possible. And I think too often people feel like change is possible for everyone else but me. And I felt that way for a long time. And it's just a lie. It's a lie that keeps you from actually trying.
So I know this is something that you've utilized both in your own personal journey, and then you've also, started helping others through this method, and that method is coaching, right? So so talk a little bit about coaching, in both how it's been valuable for you personally in your journey, and then what made you want to start, helping others through that process.
Well, I think it's always been a part of my life on some level or another. I've always worked in counseling roles or roles that involved working with people on personal development. I was in higher education for a long time, working in student development and residence life and student activities and leadership development for decades. So a big part of that, obviously is like listening skills. And then I became a trainer to help other people with those things. And then I left that part of my life. I was someone who believed that he could never be coached personally. Like I just thought it's not possible, especially when it comes to like health and fitness and weight loss and that sort of thing. I'm like, I'm uncoachable. I'm stubborn. I'm a very stubborn person. I'm not going to listen to someone else. And I had someone I had connected with on the internet, of course, who became a friend, say he was starting coaching and he knew that I was at a point in my journey where I was struggling and looking for help. Would I be interested in talking to him? And I did. And his name is Jonathan Shane. At that time, he was going by the Keto Road, and he became my coach. And I decided I just had to give myself over to the process, and learned so much about myself and about health and nutrition in general. Like the things I was good with what I was doing on keto at that point, but I kind of took it to the next level, like learning through that experience for myself. And soon after we stopped that working relationship, probably, 6 months or so later, he was leaving the program he was working with and starting his own company. And he's like, I would love to have you, I know just from knowing you as a person and what I see you put out there, the things that you're really good at. And I think you could be really helpful to other people. And I had never really thought about it and decided to, give it a try. And of course, like most people in life, went through a lot of self-doubt and did I really have anything to give to another person? Like, could my experiences translate? And decided to give a try and started in a group coaching setting, kind of get my feet wet and learn what people talk about and bring up and those sorts of settings. And then I went on to start working with one-on-one clients and learned a lot about myself, but also learned that what I had was valid and was helpful and was something that I could translate and I could communicate about translating. Cause I think that's the biggest thing. I think everyone who loses, you see everyone and their brother who loses weight says, no, I'm going to coach you and I'm going to give you a program. And I don't think every person can communicate. You can tell your story. There's a difference between telling your story and helping another person live their story and communicate that experience to another person in a way that isn't just about telling you. Like, it's never just about me telling. I don't just get on the phone with someone and be like, well, let me tell you what it was like when I was fat and what I did to change. Like, it's about helping that person unlock their purpose and then build action on that purpose and get consistent and be accountable. And with me and my experience, when someone says, well, I'm going through this, like I always say to every client, especially when I'm working with someone new, there is nothing you can ever tell me that's going to shock me, disgust me, or throw me. The stories I can tell you would curl your toes. So don't ever worry about, what you're going to share with me. What you're sharing with me is about you. And from there, it grew for me. It became something that I love doing.
I think, just to encourage anyone listening, who may be considering whether it's coaching, whether it's getting plugged into some kind of community, I tried to do a lot of my journey alone. And you can, in today's day and age, you can learn a lot of information just with podcasts, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. You can learn a lot, and you can almost feel like you're part of a community, but there's really is something different about engaging with someone that can, talk back to you, and you can dialogue with them, and you can bounce ideas off, or you can just share, when you're having a rough day, and whether that's, someone you're in a paid coaching relationship with, or someone that's a friend, or someone, that you meet online that you're able to message with, or whatever it is, there's lots of different ways it can look. But I definitely encourage, that as an important part of a journey, to bring people along with you and to engage in that kind of communal aspect of it. As we're approaching kind of the end of the conversation today, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you wish we would have gotten to talk about?
I believe change is possible for everyone. Like I said that already, but I'll say it again. I think if you're in a place where you believe that it's not possible, part of you has to tell yourself that you're not right and be willing to, spark some hope. And if that hope comes from hearing someone else's story on your show or on my show or on another show, or reading someone's story online or following someone online, use whatever you need. Because for a lot of us, this is a fight for our lives. So use whatever you need. And that means use whatever tools you need, whether that is surgery, a specific way of eating, GLP-1s, coaching, whatever. Therapy is a big thing. I honestly think that's a big part of a lot of the journeys of people on the show that doesn't get talked about much. Use the tools that you need, because you can achieve those things that you want to achieve. And it may not look on day 200, it may not look the way it did on day 200, on day one. And you may realize by day 200 that what you wanted on day one isn't what you want anymore. But that's the amazing part about this process, is that you're continuing to grow and move forward and learn more about yourself. And it's you when you talked about, finding that sense of community or accountability, like isolation is what I think kills people, especially when you hear the stories of people that have struggled, with super morbid obesity. A lot of times they're alone, or they're living in echo chambers that aren't truly supporting them or challenging them. So finding ways to get support, finding ways to be challenged, is something I think every person could benefit from.
So where can people find you online? Where can people listen to the show?
Sure. So the podcast is the Fat Guy Forum. It's available on every podcast platform there is: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Podbean, like pretty much anything, anywhere that the RSS feed can be found, you're going to be able to listen to that podcast. But I think Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio are some of the bigger ones that people use for the most part. Apple, Spotify, really primarily. So that's where you find the podcast. As for finding me on Instagram, Threads, and X, I'm Gormy Goes Keto. My coaching is through the website, theketoroad.com. And I also publish recipes and blogs there. I write a lot of blogs. I do newsletters that come out 3 times a week that either tackle a deep topic, a top 10 list, or we work on motivation. And so there's some resources there. I'm not really sure when this is going to be visible and viewed to people, but coming up over the next couple of weeks, we're launching a mindset-focused program. That's a group coaching program called the Momentum Masterclass. And it's to help people through the holiday season through January of next year. So it's not just tackling the holidays and how to manage that, but everything you need to build a momentum focused mindset. It's not just for people that are following keto. It's for people on all ways of eating, all tools. If you're interested in the nutrition side of things, there is also a personalized nutrition component available with that to plug that, because that's starting soon. But that's really built upon this concept of you have to start with purpose and build action from there. And what are the things that are going to help you support that action as you move forward? And I'm really excited for that because it very much is a class this time. We've done group coaching programs, and this is very much like a course on everything involved with mindset. So I'm excited for that to happen. And you can find out more about that at theketoroad.com.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll have those links in the show notes. So definitely check all those out and follow Gormy on Instagram. And you can also obviously follow the show, Keeping It Off show, and my YouTube channel, Joel Gets Swole. Check those out. And Gormy, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. I know I've gotten so much personally from your wisdom, your journey, and from the podcast. And really, it's a cool opportunity that you are able to come on my show now. So really, really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much, man. And I appreciate seeing everything that you're doing. And I know we had talked about you doing this and that it was launching, and I'm excited to see it happening and growing, and look forward to see where it goes.
Awesome.
If you're still here, a few quick things before we end. If you found this content helpful or valuable and you'd like to support the show, there are 2 ways you can do that. First, you can help grow the audience by sharing this episode on social media, or even send it directly to a friend that you think would enjoy it. Second, you can leave a 5-star review on whatever podcast app you're listening with. If you'd like to be a guest on Keeping It Off, you'll find a link in the show notes to a simple form you can fill out, and I'll be in touch. One other note, this show is for information only, not medical advice. I'm not a medical professional, so please check with your doctor before making any changes in your healthcare. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you'll come back and check out another episode of Keeping It Off.